Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Astoria Bookshop virtual event. If you do not know who I am Christian. I'm one of the booksellers here at the Astoria Bookshop. I also help run events at the store, so you may have seen my face a few times if you've been to any of our events. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to be introducing our authors today, and just as a reminder, if you would like to purchase any books from us, you can go to astoriabookshop.com, but especially purchase the two books that will be, or three books rather, from us tonight, which is Murder in the Bayou Boneyard and Here Comes the Body by Ellen Byron and Death of the New American by Mariah Fredericks. So before I begin, I'm going to just introduce them, and then they'll have a great conversation about their works. So Ellen Byron's Cajun Country mysteries have won the Agatha Award for Best Contemporary Novel and multiple Lefty Awards for Best Humorous Mystery. Her new Catering Hall mystery series, written as Maria DeRico. Sorry, yeah, I had that right in my head.
It's okay. It's my nonna's maiden name.
Launched with Here Comes the Body and was inspired by her real life. Her pen name was in Astoria. Ellen is the sorry, wait, I skipped the part. Her pen name was the maiden name of her late Nonna, Maria Di Virgilio, a longtime Astoria resident. Ellen is the award-winning playwright and non-award-winning TV writer of comedies like Wings, Just Shoot Me, and Fairly Odd Parents. She has written over 200 articles for national magazines, but considers her most impressive credit as working as a caterer waiter for Martha Stewart, which is pretty impressive.
Thank you. I'm in her book.
Yeah. Oh, I did not know that. That's a really good fun fact. And then our other author here today, who you may have seen from many of our events here at Astoria Bookshop, Mariah Fredericks was born and raised in New York City, where she still lives with her family. She is the author of several YA novels. A Death of No Importance is her first adult novel. You can take it away.
Great.
Ellen, I am so excited to be here to celebrate Murder in the Bayou Boneyard.
I'm so thrilled you invited me to do this. You know, it's a dream come true. So, because of my long connection to Astoria, I think I mentioned, you know, my Maria DeRico is my pen name for the Catering Hall series and was inspired. And we'll, of course, get to Bayou Boneyard, but I thought anyone who's from Astoria might appreciate this, that my nonna lived in Astoria for years. My mother lived there till she married. My family lived there for just decades, and cousins ran the Astoria Manor and then also Grand Bay Marina, which is where we had our New York reception. And both of those locations are what inspired the Catering Hall mysteries, which is set in Astoria. In fact, my character goes to La Gulli Pasticceria, which I can't wait to visit again someday.
Well, that was the great thing about reading this book. It was a tour of the New York I feel like I haven't seen in 6 months. And it was this wonderful virtual reunion with the city. Is this cozy set in Queens?
It might. You know what? I think I'm not sure. It might be. I mean, I'm sure if anyone knows a cozy set in Queens, please weigh in. You know, you're always a little nervous writing an urban cozy because it's kind of a small niche, basically occupied by Cleo Coyle. And I'm sure there are, you know, New York urban cozy. So, and the whole trick with cozy, which is what I did with creating the fictional town of Pelican, Louisiana, in my Cajun Country mysteries, where the town motto is "Yes, we Pelican," and then I, you know, was creating the feel of a small town. So with the series set in Queens, you know, I created a sense of a little neighborhood in Astoria, which was inspired by literally my character lives in the house where my nonna lives, in the two-family house. She lives upstairs where my Titi Rose and Uncle Henry lived, and nonna lived downstairs. So so my character's nonna lives downstairs in the first floor, and then she lives upstairs where my Zia and Zio lived. So, but I created the sense of this little community within a big city. But she goes into Manhattan. She has to go into Manhattan,
Right.
And she has the whole thing about, I think, Queens residents and boroughs, outer boroughs, as we're called, residents would appreciate that. And Here Comes the Body, there's a whole runner about how people keep saying, well, I'm going into the city. And she keeps saying, Queens is the city, you know. She keeps getting annoyed that people keep calling it the city, which, of course, I do all the time. So, I mean, that, you know, yeah, Manhattan is the gold standard that
Right.
those of us from the outer boroughs were always like, oh, right.
I called it for years because I grew up in Manhattan and now live in Queens. And,
you did the reverse.
And people kept saying like, oh, I'm going into the city. And I was like, no, we are the city. We are more the city than Manhattan. And now, of course, after 15 years, I'm like, yeah, we're going in the city. But tell me a little bit about the book that's launching today, Murder in Bayou Boneyard, because I love this series, and I discovered it years ago, and I was looking through something fun to read, and there was a Basset Hound in a Santa Claus suit, and like a zombie, I went to click buy, and now we have the Basset Hound in a tracksuit. It's Halloween.
Yes. Well, the Basset Hound was inspired by our late Basset rescue, Lucy, who passed away, I think it was about 2010. And I loved her dearly. And I've actually immortalized all three of our dogs in some form in the series. Actually, it's a funny thing because I created the dog we have now. We had Lucy, and then we got Wiley, and then we got Pogo. And after Lucy passed, and Pogo is this little Chihuahua, and he is Jolie. I made him a girl in the series, but I also made Lucy a boy. The Gopher, the Basset Hound, is a boy. But then I realized that because I put Wiley into a book that the first thing I ever wrote, and that didn't sell. Wiley was not in a series. So in the book you're saying, the Cajun Christmas Killing, there's a whole scene where I created a character who had a pet, kind of a support dog, named King Cake. And King Cake is actually he's actually Wiley, our late, who passed away, and he gets a whole scene. Oh no, well, actually, Gopher the Basset Hound in that book, I believe it's that book. You begin to lose track when you've written a bunch of them. Gets a whole scene where he's the hero and helps rescue King Cake from a nasty villain.
Yes.
And the reason, I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just saying, like, whether you're writing about, I was really amazed because, you do Louisiana so beautifully. And then when you moved to Astoria, I was really struck how you evoked both places so well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I transferred from SUNY Binghamton in the middle of sophomore year to Tulane University in New Orleans. And I was always a Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams was my idol. And one thing I think I related to in Tennessee Williams is how he created atmosphere and setting. And when I became a playwright, that became so important to me. That setting really inspired me. And Louisiana, Cajun country is so fascinating to me. I mean, the swamps, New Orleans. I mean, it's just like no other place anywhere. Excuse me. Really, it's so unique unto itself. And so one of the great gifts of both series, well, the first series, and then I took it into the second one, is the chance, because my background really is dialogue, because plays and TV, you're really communicating through dialogue. Even if you write a screenplay, the screenplay directions are translated into scenes. So nobody reads them except the people reading them. So, one thing I loved writing about the books was it gave me a chance to write setting and to really get into it and create the atmosphere. But I have to tell you something funny that I realized. It hit me one day that I just was writing the draft of my 7th Cajun Country mystery, and I realized I'd never used the word muggy, that I wrote 6 books set in Louisiana without using the word muggy. So muggy is in my 7th book. And I made sure to get that word in there and to describe the weather at one point as muggy.
You overuse. I find there are certain words I overuse horribly.
Yeah. Just, of course, that's a big one I have to do. And that I'm constantly pulling that. And at one point I had a copy editor who kept putting them back in and I kept having to take them out. I'm trying to think really, I mean, a lot of those kind of adjective-y words, I think I'm terrible at grammar, by the way. I didn't train as a writer and I'm just abysmal at I know how to use it. I just don't know how to name it. Do not ask me what a dangling participle is. I would fail a grammar test. In fact, I think I have in the past. So, I just realized you can see my daughter's coat rack and she hangs all her purses in the corner. I'm working from her room because the scene from my room is so hideous, the background. And plus, being the pandemic, my husband and I are sharing an office. So the poor guy needs... Yeah, so we set me up in here. I think I'll have to do something about that coat rack, or people can just enjoy it.
Right.
So I'm trying to think what other words I use. Clearly, sometimes, or I have to. Yeah, I can't remember. So
I overuse foolish constantly and gentle. I had like 50 fools, foolish. I was like, all right, we need some stupids and some ridiculousness.
Well, that's interesting because your series is historical. So foolish is a word that people would use then. The only person I think would use the word foolish is the grand-mère in my series. She might use the word foolish because it's because people now would say that idiot, the people, so that makes sense.
Right.
So. And your series is so, I feel like, when I read one of your books, I'm taking a trip back in history, New York history, which is one of my favorite things. I'm curious, what kind of research do you do for your series?
I usually peg it to, the series progresses year by year. So I usually peg it to a key event of that year that Death of a New American is 1912, it's the Titanic, and that brought up all sorts of issues of immigration and gender dynamics, women and children first. So everything that happens in that year around those issues tends to go into the book. But I went to the Italian American Museum downtown in Little Italy. That was a wonderful place. And so, when you have when you have the city as your research guide, it really helps.
I know someone, Maria Fosco, who runs my mom. I belong to this Orsoniers group on Facebook because my mother is Orsoniers. And one of the women who spearheads that also was very involved in establishing that museum. So, it's interesting because you just made me think of, with Mardi Gras Murder, the book that won the Agatha Award, I'll throw in. One of my neighbors handed me, she was doing family research, and she, for some reason, thought maybe one of her family members, because what they did, the orphan train. Now, everyone knows about the orphan train, not everyone, but a lot of people know the one that went west. Right. She gave me this book one day called From Cradle to Grave, and it was about a specific orphan train that went to Cajun Country. And so it did the same thing, which took, abandoned children and orphans from the New York Foundling Hospital, but it transported them to Cajun Country where they were adopted, and this book tracked what happened to all these orphans. And so that inspired the plot for Mardi Gras Murder. And it was interesting because some of them had great lives and some of them, of course, were indentured service. But a lot of these kids arrived, at that time, and it went from I think the 1850s to 1929, and people in Cajun Country spoke French as their first language, and some of them didn't even speak English. So these kids would arrive and not be able to speak the language of their adoptive parents.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny. I feel like I can only really write about New York because I was born here, I've lived here, I have tunnel vision. Mm-hmm. Is there a place that you can't imagine writing about that would just be like the worst for a story?
You know what? It's so interesting because right now there's a group, Sisters in Crime is this organization we both belong to. And there's a subgroup called the Guppies, which stands for either the Great Unpublished or the Going to Be Published. And I'm doing a craft discussion pro now where I'm sharing as a TV writer for my TV experience. And I wrote the first book I wrote took place in Los Angeles, and it took place at the richest private school here. And my protagonist was a school a psychologist. But the thing I can't write about, because people are now saying, "Oh, you should write a series set in the TV world." I cannot, at this point, write a series set in Hollywood. So it's like I'm too close to it. Down the road, I'm sure if we moved and, I bet then I'd suddenly get struck with, inspiration. But certainly first of all, if I wrote a series set in a sitcom situation, I'd have to create the sitcom. And it was hard enough to do that when I was in the sitcom room, to be sitting there, for 12 hours a day trying to think of jokes and stories. And, so to do it for a series. But someday I'm sure I'll find the connection. It's just that right now it's just way too close.
Wouldn't people that just insist to be in the book and then you could never speak to them again? I mean, part of it, like, no matter how hard you tried not to tell all their secrets.
Well, you so end up fictionalizing it. Although the story I tell, which is absolutely true, is that I've always loved reading mysteries. But the reason I tried writing them the first time, which was 15 years ago, longer ago than that, it was 1999, was because I wanted to kill a writer who I'd worked with. I was so angry at him, and I couldn't, of course, do it in real life. So I used to teach workshops at the UCLA Writers Extension during my hiatus breaks. And I got to take a free class when I taught. So I took a playwriting class. I'd never studied, not a playwriting, I'm sorry, a mystery writing class with Geraldine Farmer. And so I wrote this chapter and I was like, oh, well, here I am, the professional writer. And it was like, not good.
Oh.
It got out of my system, but then I didn't try again to write a mystery till 2011. So,
what were like the things that helped you coming from a TV and theater background, and what were the things that you really had to finish up?
Okay, the two things that helped me was definitely what we talked about before. From the theater background, was writing setting and really creating atmosphere. And because you have to, even though people don't read the directions, you have to somehow convey that in a theater setting. In terms of TV structure, I mean, I'm an outliner, and I'm kind of an outlier as that, because a lot of people are pantsers, not plotters, meaning they write by the seat of their pants. And I can't even begin to, I've tried that and it failed miserably. And I think that comes from, my background in TV, because turning in an outline is part of your pay process. You can't go to script until the outline you've written has been gone over by a showrunner, by the studio, and by the network. And by network, I mean the, production. It could be, nowadays there's many streaming services, and sometimes those are the studio and the network are the same. So I know that every chapter, one thing I learned, in TV, you want to make sure, at least network TV, that people aren't changing the channel during the commercial break. Huh. So, you have to end each scene with a hook that will bring them back. So I learned to do that. I end my chapters, each of my chapters ends with a bit of an uh-oh. And the other thing I learned was to fight against what we call either the ham sandwich theory or refrigerator logic, which is like, after a show is over, people are going to the refrigerator and getting a snack, going, wait a minute, they're realizing they're suddenly, looking back and seeing the holes. So I try to, find the holes in the story. I've trained myself to do that, to think as an audience member who would be looking, or realize afterwards, wait a minute, that didn't really track. So I've learned how to do something that, yeah. And of course, also write how people talk. That's super important, to write natural dialogue. And that was of theater and TV. And humor, to bring humor to my work. So both of my series are humorous series, and they have heart too. I mean, I think the Catering Hall Mysteries is just pure more like, there's less of a, there's definitely heart, but it's more of a, I don't know, it's a little more humor based, and but there's plenty of humor in my Cajun Country Mysteries too.
Well, here comes the body. I mean, it's the first in the series, so you don't know, as a reader, I was just meeting the characters for the first time, whereas I know the characters from the country, and I love checking in with them, and like, they're getting married, and, there's this problem, and
well, that's the thing. That's the other thing. I think with cozy series, if you think of them, they're kind of like the classic example is Murder, She Wrote or Castle. I think of that. By the way, my husband used to say, because Castle was on so much, that ABC stood for Always Broadcasting Castle. But it's that where you have like the case of the week, but you also have the arc of the relationships. And so, and so with that, and I think that's what's really appealing. I mean, I know I'm a series reader, that if I get, attached to characters, it's like, I want to keep reading your series, and I belong to a multi-author blog called Chicks in the Case, which is, 8 fabulous female authors who all write, we all write series, and they're all smart, and I feel like cozy series, even within the mystery community, get sometimes a bad reputation as, being cutesies. But I think the people don't respect, how much work goes into them, and how good a good cozy series can be, and how people, will want to continue, and they feel like, these people. I mean, I know I feel like my characters, sometimes I forget. Do you have this where you sometimes forget that they're not real?
Oh, completely. I mean, I live in their heads all the time, and I feel like I know what Jane is doing 10 years after, the book that's out now. And it's hard to remember what you haven't told the reader. Things. But that's it's a wonderful gift to live in these people's heads.
It is. I joke sometimes that it's like, I remember there was this movie, and I've said this before, that there was this movie called Magic with years ago, I think in the 70s, with Anthony Hopkins, where he was a ventriloquist who, thought his dummy was real. And sometimes that's how I feel. It's, it's like I have to remind myself that I'm writing fiction. But back to what I was saying about the cozies is that because they have cutesy titles, and, I know we were going to talk about this a little, and did you want to put it to me as a question, or I don't want to step on your toes?
Well, I was just saying, for people who might not know exactly what the rules of cozies are and what they are, can you just let people know, like, what the general expectations of those books?
Yes, cozies are it's a term that it kind of was coined for Agatha Christie's series, because they're usually set in kind of you create a kind of a sense of community, like a little, it can be bucolic or not. I was for a while, I was describing a story as charming, and someone said to me, it's not charming. It's, like, okay, so it's still a place that you would love to live if you could. Cozies usually have amateur protagonists, and they're ongoing, and what they don't have is gratuitous bad language or sex, or violence. So, it's all like the murders happen off screen, if you will. The characters. And to me, it's, when I started writing plays, one of the first things I learned was that you only use profanity if you can't think of a better way to say something. So for me, that's like the fun challenge. Like in one of my books, the grandmother really wants to curse, but she can't, grand-mère. So I came up with fun ways, like instead of saying the S word, she would go, well, shiver me timbers. So it's a fun challenge. And some, lots of cozies have punny titles. My Cajun Country mystery doesn't so much. And Here Comes the Body is not really, that's just a ball title. If it would be, if it were a real cozy title, it'd be Here Comes the Died, Hey, now I'm now looking back, I should have gone with that. But I will have to brag about, I'm going to show you the cover for my next catering hall mystery, which comes out in the end of February, because I really was so proud of the title I came up with. I don't know if you can see it here. The title is Long Island Iced Tina.
Oh my God. That's fabulous. And
it involves a baby shower, is a bit of the impetus to it. But I was proud of myself for coming up with such a punny title. When I worked on Just Shoot Me, they would always send me off because I did a lot of magazine writing. And so when I worked on Just Shoot Me, I'm the person they would send off because they did use these interstitials, which were the magazine cover. And so they had to have titles on it. So they'd send me off to think of titles for those interstitials, for the magazine articles. And I'd come up with something like, one of my favorites was Emotional Baggage, which was like supposed to be about purses. And the one I never got to use was Who's Sorry Now, SARI, about the influence of Indian fashion. So.
Oh. I could use that now, I bet.
Yeah.
They wouldn't find a place to put it, or.
Well, I don't think they'd use it. Who's Sorry Now, unfortunately, because it's a bit culturally insensitive.
That's true, but the people on the show were pretty insensitive. I mean, I would not be shocked if they used.
Yeah, exactly. So, playing with my hair.
It's funny, like we were talking about sort of the attitudes surrounding commercial women's fiction, and I remember working at Book of the Month Club, and we offered a vast range of books. And one day at lunch, I was reading a Jackie Collins, and a coworker walked up to me and said, "I am appalled," and I felt caught. I felt my intellectual credibility was damaged, and then I thought, wait a minute. We offer any number of outrageous fantasies under technical thriller or suspense, and you would never say, I'm appalled if I was reading anything by those male writers. What do you think? What is that?
I don't know. And I don't, it's just, I think it's like there is a systemic sexism out there that, we certainly have worked our way up and for some of that, but it's still there. I mean, I experienced quite a bit of it it was always, I was going to title my quote, I joke that the title of my autobiography would be, They Have Their Woman, My Life in TV, because during the 90s and up until, the most recently, there was always like the woman slot, like they needed to gender, throw a little gender in. And so I wrote TV with a female writing partner, and we were the girls, which is fine because there was a guy team that was the boys. I never saw that as insulting, but sometimes we'd be called the short team or the one guy called us, because I'm 5'2", she was, around the same height, called us the writing Smurfs. So, you had to have a very thick skin. And I've always people, will denigrate cozies, and there are some cozies that aren't well written, but guess what? There are a ton of thrillers and suspense novels that are terribly written, and nobody would think of slamming them. And I think part of that, is, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I do feel like part of it is a little bit of a sexism because, but the thing is, there are male writers writing cozies who feel like, there's a little bit of a bias against them, and some of them use women's names. So, and that's not fair either. So it should be, we all write what we write and earn respect for it, no matter what the genre. So,
right. I mean, it's a question of how, one of the things I love about your work is that it follows the rules, you're aware of the beats, but you do it so organically and effortlessly. And
oh my gosh.
It's like I feel the moment coming. I'm like, oh, she landed it. It's just so
stuck the landing. That's hilarious. No, and yes, because it's no effort at all. It's just, they just flow out of me.
No problem. Right. No, it's like you really have to.
I spend 2 weeks to a month beating out an outline, and I call it a fluid outline because it changes. That gives me the permission to change and to morph with it, because of course, as you're writing a draft, and even when I was writing TV and even writing, we wrote some film scripts and did some film projects, even then you pitch, I've sold many an outline where you start writing the draft and go, oh shit, pardon my language. Oops. This doesn't work. And right. So either you run it, if it's a big story point, you have run it by your showrunner, or if it's something else, you just keep writing, and half the time no one goes, wait a minute, whatever happened to that beat? Because if it works, it works. And no one's looking for what didn't work. So, but then when I'm writing, in the process of writing, I mean, I've added characters all of a sudden. In fact, and Here Comes the Body. In the middle of writing the draft, I thought, I'm missing something. And I came up with this report. She needed an antagonist. And of course, my antagonists always end up being frenemies. Like in the Cajun Country Mysteries, Rufus started out the police chief as an antagonist. And I didn't want it to be the typical antagonism of, oh, he's a dumb, I wanted him to be smart. He could be lazy at what he did, being a police chief. So I gave them that there is both the families, her family and his family, go back hundreds of years in Louisiana, and that he believed that her ancestors put a curse on his family, that they would never have a successful relationship. So that's why he harbored a grudge against my protagonist. So to give it more than the typical, like, he doesn't know what he's doing, because I don't think that's really fair to law enforcement. I mean, of course, a lot of for whatever was going on, nowadays, and it's just a horrible time. I think you want to be realistic, even in a cozy, that, justify why someone's not doing their job or is bad at it,
Right.
in a believable way. So I made him kind of lazy. Mm-hmm. and someone who would cut corners, which is very real. And in the Catering Hall Mysteries, anyway, so I'm off track. So I created this character of a reporter who's always trying, my protagonist, her father was in the mob, and now the mob kind of owns, but has to run his legitimate business, this catering hall. So it's a reporter who's always trying to dig. And so they end up actually becoming kind of frenemies, but because they can be useful to each other. And so, that's a lot of transactions. Human transactions are based on, well, what can you do for me and what can I do for you? So that's a little bit of the relationship. I'm sorry, I feel like I went totally off track.
No, not at all. I was thinking about your point with police, and I often find that the police are not particularly helpful in my books either, and that was just the historical reality for work in the 1910s. But I was once talking to Bernard Whalen. Do you know him? Lieutenant Whalen? A lot of people in New York use him as a research source. And I said, I'm sorry, I know the police don't come off as particularly energized in my books, but it's also having an amateur detective. Yeah. She has to have room to operate, which if they were to do their jobs and truly dedicated, they would not have that room to operate.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we come in. So I haven't even talked about my new book. I just realized I keep going off track. So
I wrote
Murder in Bayou Boneyard.
Yes. Now it's the rougarou.
Rougarou. Or it's pronounced, some people say rougarou, but for the most part, I think it's rougarou. Okay. And it can be pronounced either way. And that is, there's a Cajun creature called a rougarou or rougarou, how you want to pronounce it, who is like part werewolf and part human, and in typical Louisiana fashion also has a touch of the vampire. So when I was setting out to write a Halloween mystery, I thought, gosh, you've got to write. Louisiana bills itself as the most haunted state in the country, and they own it. And so, a Halloween themed mystery seemed so logical to write. So I finally got around to it for the sixth book.
It took this long, yeah.
So, and so I asked some of my readers, what do you like in a Halloween mystery? And I got a bunch of things, and someone said a rougarou, and I was like, oh my gosh, because that's so perfect. Because a lot of the other stuff was very specific, it was more Halloween generic, all of which I touch on. There's a pet costume parade, but I had done. So I thought I have to get a rougarou in there. And so some of the plot revolves around that. And then in a couple of years ago, I always go to the Louisiana Book Festival to do appearances, and I love it. And I was driving back for one, and I decided to do the Creole Morning Tour, at St. Joseph Plantation. And I did a 10 a.m. one on a Sunday. I was the only person there. And it was like a living history tour where they became the characters. And I picked up all this great stuff. And I wrote a blog post on it for Chicks on the Case. And then I sent it to the, because it was just me, and the woman giving the tour was one of the descendants of the original family. So I sent it to her, and it's actually the blog post I wrote is now on their website as a testimonial, which is fun.
That's great.
So I got to use a lot. I incorporated a lot of what I learned on that tour into, like there's an 8-year-old girl who goes on a tour like it, and she revels in sharing some of the stuff she's learned. And I think a lot of it wasn't just necessarily specific to Creole or Cajun culture. It was probably specific to Victorian culture, like more the period of mourning, and which is, of course, in typical fashion, was much more rigid for women than men. So, and it's funny because I was reading one of Diane Freeman's books, which is set at the turn of the century in England. And she talks about, she has a character in Mourning, and it's the same thing, where you're transitioning from black to gray to lavender in terms of what women can wear, and the material couldn't be shiny at first, but then you could do black where it was shinier material. So it's so much fun to incorporate like some of the the legend of the rougarou or rougarou into the book, and and the other thing is, my agent one day said, "Oh, what about their Canadian relatives?" Because Cajun is if you say the word Acadian fast enough, or if you say it eventually becomes Cajun, and because they're all descendants. True Cajuns are descendants of the French Canadians from the Acadian province who were forced out of England in the mid 1700s, and many ended up in Louisiana, which at the time was owned by the Spanish, but it went back and forth between Spanish and French rule until to Louisiana Purchase, when they bought it, which was, I believe, in 1804. And they were very welcome there. And so, oh God, what was I saying? I forgot. Cajun.
You were talking about why you brought the horrible Canadian family.
Oh, yes. So my agent said, I'd love to see, what about her, does she have any relatives? And I thought, well, let's bring in some Canadians. And because Canadians have a reputation of being so sweet and so nice, and they're the most, I used to do a form of improv known as theater sports, and it started in Canada. So I spent a ton of time in Canada, and met just some of my closest friends are Canadians. And so I thought, well, everyone knows how nice they are. Wouldn't it be fun if they weren't so nice? And that gave me a chance. And I had the line in my head that I use a version of, I thought you would think that, obnoxious Canadian is an oxymoron, but it appears that's not the case, a version of that. So I decided to create some Canadians who weren't the typical, really nice image, that they were kind of assholes.
Totally. I thought Canadians, I have Canadian family, and I thought they're going to love it, to be relieved of the burden of being the nice, polite, reasonable, Canadian people. I thought it was hilarious.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad. Yeah. So
I don't want to give away the ending, but it really did keep me guessing. And
oh, good.
Do you know from the beginning, I always get this question, who did it? Do you always start the book knowing, yes, this is my murderer?
Yes, because that's part of my outlining process, because to lay the clues, I'm trying to think. The book I just finished the draft, and I'm working on the edits for the 7th Cajun Country Mystery, and I did go back and forth. That was the only one where I went back and forth about who might have done it, but I kind of knew. Even when I go back and forth more in the outline, because for me it's like I need to lay the path and the clues and the red herrings. So, but you can do that, and still a lot of people realize at the end, oh, it's not that person. But I think with everything I've written, because of the outlining, I've know who it is from the beginning, or if not, as the very, very beginning, as I'm writing the outline, it becomes clear to me.
Right.
So,
a lot of people in the book are guilty of some shady stuff, which was also,
Yes.
they were like nice little reveals all the way through.
Well, there's a bee story. I mean, that's the thing. What's so much fun about writing is like the littlest thing can suddenly create a story. Like when we were in Louisiana, we learned there was an oyster shortage because some of the beds, and this actually has to do, I don't write to climate change in the book, but it does have to do with climate change, that when fresh water gets into salt water, which is happening more and more in the bayous and Gulf Coast because of the dredging for, oil canals and stuff, it can kill an oyster bed, and it can take years for the oyster bed to come back. So I heard that, and then somehow that created a bee story, in the book. So hopefully I made oysters interesting.
Absolutely. You should know also there's a huge, for your Astoria series in Long Island City, there's a big effort to replant oyster beds.
Oh, really?
So you want to do that. Speaking of oysters, I have to ask, since you were a cater waiter for Martha Stewart, I won't ask you a dish about Martha, but were there like dark and horrible catering horror stories that make their way into the series?
The funny thing is, I love Martha. I think Martha is exactly, I hate the word authentic. It's one of those words that people throw around a lot, but she is exactly who she is. The first time I met her, I walked into her house in Turkey Hill. I was hired for a party, and that's where we met in Westport. And I'll never forget the image. She was using a creme brulee blowtorch to assemble a gingerbread brownstone townhouse in her gorgeous, like, federal era furniture living room in her hundreds-year-old house. So I have nothing bad to say about her because I'm truly fond of her. She's great. I haven't spoken to her in years. And I worked with her sister, Laura, who sadly has passed, and George, who also passed. So I knew her family, and I haven't spoken to her in a long time. And the last time I interviewed her, I used to do my first job column for Glamour. And I talked to her on the phone. We touched base and stuff, and because I interviewed her for it. And, a lot of the guys we worked with in the 80s ended up getting AIDS, and she was able to remember them and tell me what happened to so many of them. And she's really a cool person. Of course, her fame hit when I was no longer working with her, but I am entertaining. I love to say, if you look at page 29 of an early edition of that book, I'm standing right next to her holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and where she has inspired me is with a recipe. Yeah. I actually gave her a shout out in the acknowledgments, and here comes the body. But for all in fact, there's a recipe in, I believe it's Murder by the Bayou Boneyard for crottate. Or is there crottatoes? Is that in here? That was inspired because I learned from her it is crottatoes. I learned from her to use, red new potatoes and to cut them in half and take a teeny slice off the bottom, and then, scoop them out and put filling inside. So, and we did, nowadays, of course, everyone does that. But that was kind of a new thing back in the early 80s when she started doing that. And so, or we used to take sugar snap peas or snow peas and slice them open and fill them with Boursin cheese. And that was an appetizer. And again, this is all stuff that people are going, well, yeah, but back then it was kind of revolutionary.
Oh, totally.
So she's, so I do think, WWMD, what would Martha do, when it comes to creating recipes sometimes. So.
But you must have had clients who were interesting.
That was more, it was some of the parties we worked, we worked at we did Cooper Hewitt, and this was in the 80s. And some of those people were just horrible. I mean, they were the really rich in New York. And they would be just they treat you like servants. I mean, that's kind of what you were, really. But, there are plenty of people who are perfectly nice. And then other people who would just just treat you with disdain. And, and in Connecticut, when we were working some of the really waspy parties, it was, there was a lot of that. I felt like, I remember I felt like an illegal immigrant working this party with the Mexican theme. It was just like, I felt so bad I said, hey, I'm doing this because I'm an unemployed writer, actress, and, but for people whose lives it's terrible to have that feeling that you're less than, for a job you do that's really hard and exhausting. So,
waitress, and it is. I was a terrible waitress. I was the worst because it's a really hard job. And
I literally was. I mean, the cater waiter thing is different. That I got by working with Martha. I mean, she's the only person I ever did that for. And I did that for off and on for a couple of years. And so I got the hang of that. But working as an actual waitress, I did it for 3 days. There was a restaurant that opened in the late 70s in City Core, and it was called Richelieu's of London. It was based on a coffee shop there, and it had a menu with like 83 items on it. And we had to dress in Edwardian gear. It was like this Edwardian outfit, very upstairs, downstairs, with this little hat that would constantly fall into people's food. And this is like the worst thing ever. But I was so bad at it that I went home to my mom, to like the suburbs where my parents were, and I sent the costume back and had my mother call and tell them I had to quit because I was having my appendix out. It was so terrible. It didn't last very long, so clearly I wasn't. And this is the other thing that was so weird that I didn't know, that we had bread baskets. You bring the bread basket and stuff, and then the rolls people didn't eat. There was a giant brown bag in the kitchen, and you would take the rolls that people didn't eat, and you would dump it back in that giant brown bag.
Right.
Can you imagine? And I've told people that, they go, "Oh yeah, we did that all the time." I'm like, really? And it's like, it made me actually, it never made me think twice about eating a bread basket. Unfortunately, only now am I thinking, maybe I should think twice about it. But this is a million years later. I've eaten plenty of bread without giving it a thought since then.
Well, I want to ask you just quickly what you're doing now and what's next after Iced Tea, Long Island Iced Tina. And then maybe we can take some questions.
Sure, if people have any. Yes. Well, as I said, this is out today. This is my launch, Murder on the Bayou Boneyard, and it's hopefully a really fun kind of Halloween themed mystery for people who enjoy those, with those nasty Canadians and oysters. And all my books have recipes. So, they serve a dual purpose, that you can make the dishes, and which is nice. So you can, you don't have to give them away. You can keep them because they have recipes. And then Long Island Iced Tina, as I said in the second series, written as Maria DeRico, my nonna's maiden name, that will be out in February, or the end of February. I'm in the process of we're coming up with a title for my my 7th Cajun Country mystery. Right now it's between Killer Cajun Valentine and Cajun Kiss of Death. It'll be one of those titles. And looking for my Christmas themed the title for my 3rd catering hall mystery, which has this fun runner. I have to say, I haven't turned it in yet. But there's a big contest in the neighborhood for everyone decorating their houses for the holidays, which are like on steroids. So, and there's the old ladies in the neighborhood are all competitive. And one of the ladies has an animatronic Tony Bennett dressed as a Santa. And it's Tony Bennett Santa is the thing. And so they all covet that. So, because for those of you who live in Astoria know that Tony Bennett is from there. And my mother actually went to high school with him, although he was, I think, a year ahead of her. Okay. So she did not know him, and his name at the time was Tony Benedetto. So, so that's been great fun to write. And so that will be out at the end of 2021. God, which feels like it's just around the corner. Yeah. So that's what I'm up to.
I cannot wait.
Thanks.
So Christian.
Oh, there were comments. I haven't even seen those. Oh my gosh. Oh, look at that. Hey, oh my gosh. Peggy, Margaret Boiselle. I see Peggy. I still call her Peggy, although she's Margaret Ann to everyone else. She is a neighbor from when I lived in Little Neck. I've known Peggy since I was 2.5 years old, lived in Little Neck. So let's see. Oh, hey, so good to see you. Oh, look at, hi, everyone. Let's see. Did you come up with the title, Murder in the Bayou? There's a question from Lisha. I don't know how to say this, if it's Lisha or Alicia. I'll say Lisha. Well, actually, that's a title that my publisher came up with, Murder in the Bayou Boneyard. That was another one where we really struggled. The first draft, I called it, I knew this wasn't going to work. It was Halloween horror, horror spelled in the French way. And you really can't use foreign words in titles because people think, it's misspelled. So I knew that was a place marker. And we went through a ton of tunnels. And then one day, Matt Martz, who's the publisher and editorial director at Crooked Lane Books, just shot that out. And that was perfect. So okay. Oh, and then Lisa, hi. Did you ever find it a challenge to move back and forth between Louisiana and Story in your 2 series? Well, I'll tell you hi, Lisa. Lisa is a fabulous author who's also one of my blog mates at Chicks on the Case. Well, it's hard when you're a dum-dum and name one of your protagonists Maggie and the other one Mia.
I wonder.
That's what's really hard. So I have to police both series to make sure I'm using the right name. And because let me tell you, it's more than once, Maggie has slipped into the Catering Hall Mysteries and Mia has slipped into the Cajun Country Mysteries. I don't know what I was thinking. And they both have grandmothers they live with. I think I have a theme to everything I write. So that is where it's hard. And because the settings are so different, what's interesting is the book series kind of have 2 different voices. Like my first theater agent said, you have 2 voices. You have your theater voice and your TV voice. And that always stuck with me because in writing these 2 series, I think the tones of them are different. And I go into my New York head when I'm writing the Catering Hall Mysteries, and I start having the accent. My character, if you know the actress Leah Remini, she's very much in my head when I write the Catering Hall Mysteries. And so that series is more of my TV voice. It's very snappy and quippy. And then the Cajun Country series is more of my theater voice. It's, the kind of like the languid, the Spanish moss on the trees and the bayous. And it's like that incredibly rich environment that is so special and unique that I get to write to. So I love Who's Sorry Now. That's funny. So thank you for loving that. Oh, Lori, hey, thank you. Oh, look at all these people. Hi. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. Hi, Debbie. Hi, who else? Who I know here? Ginger and Lori and more Debbie and Emily. And oh, great. Let me see if there are any other questions in here. The Christmas light story. It's fun. I have to say, I have a fun time. Oh, do your books, Alicia, I love your character questions. Do your books characters talk to you? And if you do, have you had to change something in the story because of it? What a great question. And I think we should both address that. Yes, I hear them talk. And I think that's why part of the, translating into dialogue. I mean, I hear their voices. And one thing I learned writing plays is they tell you when you're writing plays that a reader, should be able to know who's speaking without ever looking at the name tag. Because you created the voice of each character that uniquely. So they know, oh, that's Mia. That's, so I try really hard to do that in my books. I don't know if I think it was more, I don't know if I'm completely successful, but I need to hear the characters and I see them visually, like I said, I very much see Leah Remini, when I'm writing. And also my friend Lori Graff, I see her too, and Lori doesn't know this, I have to tell her that, but I see her when I'm writing that. So I have a visualization of a lot, like Grande Mère in the Cajun Country Mysteries. I always see Blythe Danner. Like if that ever, I'd love to see her do that. Now, what about you? You answer that.
My characters are always moving in my head like a movie, like they don't speak directly to me, but I've definitely, what I find is that certain characters refuse to be written out. In book 3, Death of an American Beauty, there was sort of a boyfriend character that I thought, well, he's cute for one book and then that'll be that. And then I thought, no, he's going to come back. And he took Jane in a very interesting direction that I had never thought of her going, and let her grow as a character in a way I hadn't expected her to.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had actually in Plantation Shutters, the first book I thought, oh, my character needs an ear, like someone she can talk to,
Right.
which is often the dog. But she also needs kind of a cohort. And so I created Gainel Bourgeois, which is actually inspired by a real person, a woman who's, I gave her the choice because she's a musician and she's in her 80s. I said, you can be the grandmother or the 19-year-old musician. And Gainel said, oh, I'll be the 19-year-old musician.
Oh.
But then as I was writing the series, her relationship with Grand-Mère became so prevalent that I found myself I wanted to keep Gainel, but I had to find other ways to use her because the Grand-Mère really became a little bit of her cohort and her, her ear. So, Emilia. Do you like to read any specific authors when gearing up for either series, or do you prefer to not read and have a clean palette? I don't want to read books that are written like mine, which is why I am a big historical cozy reader. That's how I discovered Mariah. I love historical cozies. I also read Louise Penny and Jacqueline Winspear. I read traditional mysteries because they force me to give my series more layers than I might without that. So those are what I really like to read. What about you?
I agree that it's, I mean, there are a lot of intimidatingly great historical mystery writers, so you can get a little overwhelmed. So I read a lot of people like Nancy Bilio or, Laura Bowen or Susan Amelia McNeil is awesome. I mean, it's easier. Alyssa Maxwell.
Oh, yes. I love her series.
Yes. She's so great. But I like to read out of my particular genre. But if I'm struggling, I like to actually love to read plays because something about the intensity of dialogue and the character and every word has to count. And I love reading history, good narrative.
Oh, well, I was going to just say that I love reading nonfiction. I mean, I have like piles of books about Louisiana that my excuse is, well, it's research, but I just love reading it.
Right.
So I'm like, I mean, I love Eric Larson. Oh, and Astoria Bookshop, are you reading anything good right now? Oh gosh, I have to remember I'm like, oh, I'm trying to read, I have a suspense I've been reading and so I read Hallie Ephron. We're going to be doing an event soon. I love Hallie. She's great. And she writes great domestic suspense. So I just read Careful What You Wish For by Hallie. As I said, I love historical mysteries. I can't read enough of Mariah can't write fast enough to keep me happy. And I'll be reading Alyssa Maxwell soon too. And then I read a couple of things that were okay, but not great. I'm trying to think what else. It's like I've been reading so much that I can't. What about you? Have you read?
I love Murder in the Bayou Boneyard, truly.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm weirdly rereading Marathon Man, which is so good and holds up really well. And I read Courting Mr. Lincoln, which Louis Bayard, which I cannot say how much I love that book. It is just an amazing, amazing book.
And so, well, I guess, gosh, I'm trying. I know once this is over, I'll go, oh, right, I forgot I read that.
This. Right.
That's the thing about us, that we're authors and we're readers, I mean, I'm writing mysteries because that's what I love to read. And it's so fulfilling. I can't even tell you. I'm trying to see if there are any other questions, or do we need to wrap this up? Those are all such great questions, everyone. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Ellen, I want to ask you, I think you don't like just like for selfish reasons, I want to ask for self-promotion as a writer. None of us likes to do it. I love that you call it shameless shilling because you just put it right out there. How do you are there parts that you really hate? Like there are parts that I can't stand doing, but I have to eat a lot of chocolate to get past them. How do you gear up to have the energy to just put yourself out there?
You know what? I mean, I love in-person events. There's nothing better than meeting the readers because, we are readers and we're authors. And, without us, I dedicated one of my books to readers because I said, without you, this wouldn't be a book. It would just be a file on my computer. So that is a total pleasure for me. And even doing these kind of, the virtual events, of course, there's nothing like in person, but this is great. I mean, I get to see you, I get to answer questions. I wish I could meet everyone here in person, but those are a pleasure to do. The thing that's hard is going on Facebook or Twitter. Twitter's become more of my political rant, so don't follow me there unless you agree with me. But Instagram and Facebook, and really Facebook, there are a ton of groups and just going on endlessly and selling yourself. That's really hard. And that's why we created the shameless shilling campaigns that I created, where I've trained myself to use Canva and to create these graphics. And if you go to my website and my blog, I just shared the blog I wrote for Chicks on the Case, or you can go directly to Chicks on the Case, where I shared all the graphics I came up with for shameless shilling for Murder on the Bayou Boneyard, in the Bayou Boneyard, because I used my daughter's Halloween costumes to create them and made silly puns. Like it would be a catastrophe if you didn't buy this book, and it's Eliza in her cat costume. Or no clowning around. This is, a great review, and it's her in a little Halloween like clown costume. So, that's the only way I can do that. So is to be self-effacing about it. It's so hard. It's there's always the humble brag approach. Is like, I can't believe this. I got this great review. It's hard. That is the hardest thing for any of us, I think. But, but it's what we have to do, because really a lot of promotion has fallen into the laps of the authors. So for you readers who are sick of seeing us, know that we're sorry. We're feeling, I have a newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter, please. You can sign up for it at ellenbyron.com. And that goes out once a month. And I always try to include something to make it worth people's time, like a recipe. And what I've started to do is I have this hobby now of collecting vintage recipe cookbooks. So now I'm starting to share as the recipe in my newsletter, recipes from some of these vintage cookbooks. Like I have a photo play cookbook from 1928 that has recipes of silent stars and like John, and of course, this was like, it was the studio publicist probably doing it, but like John Barrymore's recipe for, spaghetti sauce.
Right.
So I'll take a picture of the recipe and share it. And my most recent one, I have a 1950 cookbook from the Pillsbury Bake Off. So I shared a recipe, like I forgot what it was for, some coffee cake, from 1950.
So give people stuff that's fun, that sort of side promotes.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you love the video. I wish I could get the correct pronunciation of Lisha, that you love the video. Thank you. And thank you for signing up for my newsletter. I really appreciate that. That's so, yeah, it was fun making that. Oh, yes, because I made a video too. She's bringing up something that I didn't mention, that I make these little videos through Lumen 5 that I share. And I used the same graphics I used in this video, and it was really fun. And you can find it on YouTube under my YouTube channel. I have a channel there. If you just look me up on YouTube, some of the older videos will come up. But if you go to my channel, you'll find it. So, and it's also on Facebook. So, and Instagram, I shared it on Instagram too. I found a way. I feel like we spent half our lives finding workarounds for.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So happy for you. I am looking forward to the new books. And
thank you. Now, when's your next one? What about you? When do I get my next Jane Prescott?
Next Jane Prescott, Death of a Showman, comes out in April. Louise Tyler invests in a Broadway musical, and murder ensues and mayhem. And I loved it. I broke Jane's heart like 5 times during this book. I had a great time.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. That sounds fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Very cool. And thank you to the Astoria Bookshop for giving me this wonderful opportunity in a place that means so much to me, Astoria, Queens. Home of, I get to write about 2 of my favorite places, Astoria and Louisiana. The yin and yang of my life.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you so much, Christian.